Hey friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Feed the Birds. So I've already made one card with this set, but I wanted to use the other little girl and some of the other images to create another card. So I've stamped out my images in Lawn Fawn jet black ink on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. I started with the little girl's skin and I used E000, E00, and E11 for that. Just put the shadow up under her hairline and the highlight at the bottom of her face. I did do a second layer off screen, and now I'm adding some rosy cheeks with YR00 and YR01. And while I have the YR00 and YR01, I'm also going to add the YR02 and use that to color in the bluebirds' bellies and faces. So use the YR02 first, and then blended that out with the YR01, and then I'll use the YR00 as my highlight, keeping the area around the eye nice and light. And then I'm going to move on to her hair, and I'm using E50, E51, and E53 to start. So I'm using that E50 first to kind of map out the areas that I want to be the darkest eventually. And then I will start to darken that up with the E51. So I normally color darkest to lightest, except when I do hair. I like to start with the lightest in that case and build my color up. So now I'm taking the E53 and adding a little shadow under her hat, and then also just darkening up the area where it's gathered and the area where it goes behind her neck and also the very ends. Then I'm blending all of those colors back down in the reverse, and then I decided that I wanted to add a little bit more darkness to create some more contrast. So I pulled in the E55, and I'm adding a tiny bit of that to my darkest areas, and also adding just a few little streaks that are going through the lighter areas to create a few little low lights in those highlights. And then I decided to darken that up even further with the E57, and just doing that same thing, just adding a little bit here and there until I'm happy with the result. I haven't been coloring hair for all that long. It's been a few months now, but definitely in comparison to the 10 years that I've been coloring critters, it's still new to me. So I just like to work at it until I achieve a look that I'm happy with. While I have these markers out, I'm going to go ahead and color the tree branch. I started with the E57 as my shadow on the underside, and then blended up with the E55, and now I'm using the E53 for the highlight on the top. Now I'm going to jump back to the little girl's jacket, and I wanted it to be a nice vibrant red. So I'm using R24, R29, R39, and R59. I picked 4 colors because I really wanted there to be a lot of depth and contrast on this garment. So I'm starting with the R59 and laying in some shadows anywhere that there are little creases drawn, anywhere where the fabric would be overlapping another part, or anything that would be cast in shadow, like the area underneath her scarf and the little pockets. And then I'm going to begin to blend that out with the R39. Right now I'm keeping my darkest very minimal because I want to just have a little bit of that. It's going to really make the lighter colors pop. So I'm just going to finish laying that in, and then I'll grab my R29, which is such a beautiful vibrant red, and I'm going to begin to fill in most of the rest of the jacket. I'm just going to leave a few little areas that I think would have a bit more of a highlight. So I will leave those white and then fill those in with the R24. That one has a bit of a pink tone to it, so it's going to really help me tie in to the rest of the coloring that I plan to do on her outfit. Next, I'm going to color in her little skirt, and I wanted that to be hot pink. So I'm using RV13, RV14, and RV17. I did a little shadow underneath her jacket, and then I'm trying to highlight the little scallops at the bottom of the skirt with a bit of shadow, and then filled that in with the RV14, and then the RV13 as the lightest. For her scarf, I'm using R11, R20, and R22. So I'm going to start with that R22 and add some color to the outside edges, and also just increase the area where it's kind of folded and gathered. And then I'm blending that out with the R20 and saving a bit of room in the center for the R11. That R11 pushed back that mid-tone quite a bit, so I will go back with that R20 and add a few more flicks of that back in. And then I'm going to color her mittens to match. So I'm just doing a little shadow on the bottom edge, and then also accentuating the thumb area with a little shadow, and then blending out with the R20 and the R11 for the highlight. And I'm going to do her hat to match as well. I wanted it to be like a whole little accessory ensemble there. So I'm using the R22 as the darkest on the outside edges, and also put a little shadow above the folded up brim, and then blend it out with the R20 again. And then I'll fill in the area right over her face with the highlight with the R11. For the little pom-poms, I used R00 and R01, and I also decided to use those to color in her tights. So I just added a little shadow under her skirt and on the sides of her legs, and drew in her knee, and then just blended that back out. And then for her boots, I'm going to use C0, C1, and C3. I used C1 and C0 for the top part, and then C3 for the toe, and I wanted a bit more contrast, so I'm going to pull in the C5 and add a bit of that as well, and then go back over the edge of that with the C3. I did the buttons on the sides of her boots with the C5 and also on her jacket. For her little dish of seeds, I initially pulled out BG quadruple 0 and BG 10, but it just didn't have enough color for me at all. It wasn't working for me, so I pulled in BG 11, added a bit of shading with that. Still really wasn't working for me, so I grabbed the BG 13 and added in a bit of depth with that, and then blended that back out with the BG 11, and I was much happier with that result. And then I am going to use those shades on my bluebirds. Normally I would color bluebirds with a bit more of a blue tone rather than an aqua, but I was trying to match the pattern paper that I will be using later on, so that's why I decided to go with these shades here. So I just did a little shadow with the BG 13 on the tips of their wings and tail, and a little bit on their face, and then I'm blending out with the BG 11, and I'm going to fill in the highlight area with the BG 10. And since they're such small images, I went ahead and did both at once. On larger images, I like to concentrate on just one at a time so that I can really get a nice blend. Using YR23 for the little seeds in the dish, and then I went back to my C5 for their beaks. And now I'm using BG 75 to color in the little pine branches. For my squirrels, I decided to use warm grays, and I know a lot of you are probably shocked because I absolutely love red squirrels. They're one of my favorite animals in the whole wide world, and I just think they're so sweet. But The color palette I thought went better with the warm grays, so I decided to do those for a change. So I'm using W00, W1, W3, and W5. And because these are a little bit larger, they're still smaller images, but I still feel like it's better to do just one at a time. That way it's a little bit easier to blend because the ink is still wet and the paper is saturated. So I'm going to start with the W5 as my shadow, laying a little bit in down the backs of the ears, adding a little bit above the nose to accentuate that area and make it look a little bit recessed, and also underneath the tail. And then I'll blend that out with the W3 and just really soften up the edge of that W5 and get it to blend so that these critters look nice and soft and fuzzy. Then I'm going to use the W1 to finish most of the body area. That'll be the highlight for that. I'm going to leave a little bit of space on the face and the belly and the tip of the tail, and that's where I'm going to use my W00. I used the W5 to color in their noses, and then I pulled in R01 to give them some rosy cheeks. And then I'm going to grab my Sakura white Jelly Roll pen. I'm going to add a few little lines in the pom-poms to make them look extra fuzzy. It's hard to pick up on camera against that light pink background, but you can see it more in real life. I also thought it would be fun to add a little texture to the Bluebirds on their breasts with the white gel pen, and I added a few little lines on their wings and tail and also on their head with that white gel pen. I'm still not super confident with adding the white gel pen accents, but I do like to kind of experiment and try things. So I also decided to add some little white polka dots to her skirt just to give a little bit of print there. I thought about adding some detail to her scarf and mittens and hat, but I decided that I wanted to use some stickles later on, and that kind of makes the white gel pen dissolve, so I decided to leave those blank for now. But I did go over the eyes with my black Jelly Roll and then trim these out with their matching dies. The pattern papers that I'm using today are from the Simple Stories Sweet Talk 6x8 pad, and even though this is a Valentine collection, I'm actually going to pull out some patterns that are more everyday prints because it's going to be past Valentine's Day by the time this video goes live, but I still really love the color palette and I just can't get enough of this pad. So I chose what pieces I wanted to use. I also trimmed out a white snowdrift and I'm stamping my sentiment on that. I'm using Versamark Onyx Black ink, and I stamped "Thank you for your kindness." And then I'm going to pop my card base in my MISTI, and I'm stamping on that with Lawn Fawn bubblegum ink. And I'm using the little seed bag and another one of the birds, and then the sentiment that says "Silver white winters that melt into spring," because that's just fitting for the time frame that we're in right now, at least up here. And so I'm going to start assembling my focal panel. I trimmed out the cloud print with one of the A2 Stitch Rectangle Stacks Set 2 from MFT, and then I used the Stitch Hillside Borders from Lawn Fawn for the snowdrifts. The cloud piece that I had was a little bit short, so I'm adhering everything to an extra piece of white cardstock just so I have the sizing correct. So I will set that off to the side to dry, and now I'm going to add my pattern papers to the card. So there are those dies that I mentioned. I'm still using that same set of the A2 Stitch Rectangle Stack Set 2. So I'm going to adhere the floral print down first. It just leaves the tiniest bit of a border on the outside edge. And then I'll do this little red print that is running vertically down the center of the card, and then the plaid print will go horizontally. Then I added some foam tape to the back of my focal panel so that will have a little bit of dimension on the card. I'm going to center that up and then pop that down into place once I'm happy with it. And then I can pull in my images. Off to the side, I took that branch and just trimmed off the tiniest bit with my cutter bee scissors, just so the edge would be flush with the focal panel. And then I grabbed my little girl and I'm going to add her onto the card. I'm going to have her standing on the right hand side of the front snowdrift. And then I'm going to make sure that that tree branch is going to fit. I want it to tuck a little bit behind her head so that it pushes her forward in the scene. So I'm just going to get that situated and make sure that it goes all the way to the edge of that panel so that it looks like, the tree is just beyond, the frame of the viewer. Then I'll take one of the little birds and tuck that so that it looks like it's standing on that branch. Going to use the squirrel that is looking up at the little girl, put that over on the left hand side so it's kind of waiting for her to toss the little seeds onto the ground below, and then the other little guy is going to be looking down there because I am going to stamp some extra seeds once I get all of these little critters placed. I put another little bird down below, kind of in front of the squirrel, just trying to fill in some space there and create some balance. So then I will take those seed images. There's a couple different ones in this set. I chose to do one larger cluster between the critters, and then I'm doing a little cluster of two over behind the birds, just so it looks like those seeds are scattered around. And then I'll go back to my YR23 to fill those in. Then I'll take my Stardust stickles and add some glitter. Like I said, I was going to put it on her scarf and her hat. And I also put it on her pom-poms since that white gel pen wasn't really visible. I just went ahead and went right over that because it wasn't gonna, you weren't hardly gonna see it even if it did dissolve that white gel pen. So I also put some on the seeds, both on the ground and in her dish and on the little pine branches. So I'll lift that up to the camera so you can see how that sparkles and shines. And I'll give you another peek at the inside. This stamp set has become one of my absolute favorites of all time, so I'm so happy I got to play with it again. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe and ring that notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. I post new ones every Monday and Friday. If you're interested in any of the products I use, you'll find those listed and linked in the description bar below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day. Bye-bye.